Hey everyone, and welcome to The Rational Republican, a podcast where we look at complex issues facing us here in Oregon and around the nation. We'll try to address issues from a nonpartisan perspective and view our disagreements through a lens of respect rather than tribalism or divisiveness. I'm James Ball. This is Nick Perlasky.
Hey listeners, how we doing?
Today's podcast is brought to you by ProLift Garage Doors. ProLift is your one-stop shop for residential and small commercial garage doors, from openers, springs, and rollers to full reinstalls. They offer same-day service on all garage door repairs with no extra charge for evenings or weekends. Serving the greater Portland metro area, call today and set up your free estimate at 503-558-6349 or at proliftdoors.com/Portland. Again, that's 503-558-6349 or proliftdoors.com/Portland. On this episode of the podcast, we welcome Xander Almeida.
Hello. Happy to be back.
Xander is a friend of the pod, has been on a number of times. Appreciate you coming back. And the topic of this podcast is the state of the state. We are going to take a look at 2022, reflect on 2021. We have a list of topics to go over. And hopefully we will get through more than just talking about COVID for 45 minutes.
Fingers crossed. We'll see.
We will see.
The state, for the record, is Oregon.
Yes. So let's just talk about Oregon and see where we go. So do we want to start with COVID or do we want to...
Let's just get it out of the way.
Yeah, okay. Let's just pull the trigger.
So obviously we are going very close to 2 full years of COVID restrictions.
Happy
anniversary 2 months from now. Yeah, it's first pod of the year. So this is why we're reflecting. March will be 2 years, and of course we're not dealing with the lockdowns that we had at the very beginning, but we still are one of the few states that requires masks. There's still a whole bunch of controversy over vaccines, and I don't know. What do you guys think? Are we going to continue this into 2022, or are we going to finally realize that this is a pandemic and you can't control it through government action, and to try is a fool's errand?
So I think short answer, yeah.
You can tell where my stance is.
This is going to continue into 2022, and I feel like we've kind of had two things that haven't happened at the same time yet in the last 2 years that are about to happen at the same time. We've had a lot of shutdowns of businesses. We've had a lot of workers leaving the industry. We've had that whole wave. And then we've also had the wave of, that was the two things. We should start going. If you get to do what I get to do, we should be able to go back and start again. But that was the two things. We had people getting sick and we had businesses shutting down. But the two of them never really happened at the same time. Now we have this massive, even though Omicron is like, not to be, the MAGA Trumpy COVID denying person from 2 years ago, but Omicron is a head cold. It is a head cold.
It is considerably less deadly than the other variants.
And it's one of those things where in a lot of respects, I think people should kind of be playing through it and let's not have pox parties like we did 50 years ago. But like, if you have coronavirus, if you have a head cold, do the smart thing and stay home. Get yourself chicken noodle soup, get yourself Sprite. Don't go to a hospital for it. Don't need to suck up all the, 50 million tests and test yourself every day or whatever. But you just manage it like you would a normal head cold and just keep away from people. Just don't give it to as many people as you can. So we're about to have a massive case spike. We already are at the last week, 2 weeks in the middle of a massive case spike. And we have worker shortages to begin with. And so I see it every day at work. I'm sure we've all seen it every day. Restaurants in Portland have been closed. Bars have been closed. People are going back to takeout.
Signs. Yeah.
New bonuses for people. Come on as a line cook. We'll give you $1,000. So I think to short a long answer, yeah, it's going to continue into 2022. It's going to affect all types of industries. Obviously, the service industry most prevalent. But my wife is a teacher, and I'm sure we'll get into unions and PPS and whatever. But there is a fatigue for teachers, and it's not just we're trying to get to remote. We're trying to stay out of the classroom. There's people quitting the industry, and at the end of the day, if you don't have teachers, it doesn't matter whether you're online or in the classroom. If you don't have the teachers in the first place, that's kind of a massive problem. So it's endemic everywhere. The pandemic is endemic.
Xander, look like you want to say something.
I always look like I want to say something. It's just kind of the nature of my face. you twirl a mustache enough times.
You got your notes up
makes
there.
you
I feel
perfect
like
for a
it was-
I love
podcast.
my notes. So, the issue I have with Governor Brown in particular during this entire COVID thing,
You only have one issue.
I have a number of issues, and I'm going to preface this with saying I think the only person at the table that has actually lost a loved one to COVID is, the Democrats the entire time during this entire pandemic have gone and played the part of we are the party of science. We're the party of reason. We are the party that goes and looks at the facts and make decisions from there, unlike the Republicans. And the irony of all of this is that Governor Brown the entire time has just consistently changed the goalposts as to when things should reopen, when they have to shut down again based upon certain numbers. And considering the fact that we are right now at the highest point of COVID positive tests in the entire almost 2 years we've gone through this now, she's not talking about shutting things down again. She's not talking about closing down all these industries again.
Credit where credit's due. Yeah.
However, we're at 4 or 5 times the amount last November of 2020 when she shut things down again, when she said if certain numbers are this high, we can't have things open again.
Yeah.
She's not talking about that anymore. So either she's playing politics or she's following the science, and it can't be both. It can never be both.
So one of the things Xander and I before this had a quick drink at the bar, and
Thanks for the invite, guys.
you were
Come on.
working. This was at 4:30 in the afternoon.
Oh, I was
and
not
so-
working at 4:30. Oh boy, did I punch out right then.
Anyway, one of the comments I keep making is I am really looking forward to the point where we can stop pretending that wearing a mask from the door to the table or from the door to the bar makes a difference when you sit there for 45 minutes with your mask off having a drink. Like, the 45 minutes that you sit there is way more impactful than the 18 seconds that it takes to walk from the door to the bar. And so the reason for that, and so it just kind of,
It's theater.
bear with me for a second. Well, it's theater, but it's also cost and benefit. So if you were to say, like the Democrats do, that we're all about health, we're all about health safety, this is the most important, only thing we're concerned about right now is saving lives, why are restaurants even open in the first place? I'll tell you why. Because the benefit of because you would have to shut down an entire industry and
Again.
For the second time.
No, the third time.
Or that, however many.
As someone in the industry, the third time.
Yeah.
The jobs lost, the businesses closed, all of the economic destruction that would take place if we shut down the service industry is not worth the cost of saving lives. So what we do, sorry, I know you have a question, but I'm going to continue because I have a point.
We have a
point.
podcast. This is what we do.
There was a cost benefit analysis done at some point that says the cost of shutting down an entire industry is worth the benefit in saved lives of allowing the spread. Because if you're sitting there
Saved lives from coronavirus.
from coronavirus,
Yeah.
but because if you're sitting there for 45 minutes having a drink, you are spreading. You are breathing other people's air. They are breathing your air. The virus is spreading through restaurants. And if you, as a proxy for the virus spread, it is lives lost. So what we're really doing is we're trading lives lost for economic benefit and keeping the service industry open. And I don't think that the governor should be making that decision of which industries are allowed to spread the virus and which industries are allowed to kill people in exchange for staying open. I think it's much more, the people who should make that decision are you and me and our listeners. If you are afraid of coronavirus,
plural listeners?
if you are afraid of coronavirus, you can stay home and you can make that decision for yourself. The governor should not be deciding that a particular industry is allowed to spread the virus and kill people in exchange for staying open.
The one thing I will say about the service industry, being a person in the service industry for the last, 15 years of my life, but particularly with the coronavirus pandemic that we're facing currently, even according to the Oregon Health Authority, the vast majority of COVID-related illnesses and deaths were not from service industry. It is a ultra minority amount of spread and death. The vast majority came from nursing homes, from churches, and from private gatherings, and from schools.
I am fairly certain I got COVID from church. Just
case in point. And the last stat that I read from the Oregon Health Authority was it was 0.75% of COVID spread through service industry. So less than 1%. And between churches, nursing homes, and private gatherings and schools, that was like the other 80%. And so again, if you follow science, that should mean you should shut down churches, schools, private events, and have a complete lockdown on nursing homes, also prisons as well. It's a big thing. And they did none of that, which means, again, you're not following science, you are following politics.
Well, what they're doing is they're having this cost-benefit analysis, but they're not sharing that. What they're telling everybody is that they're following the science, and the reality is they're having a cost-benefit analysis, which is, I mean, to their credit, what they should be doing. The right thing to do. You should have these conversations of what are the costs of making these decisions, but they're not telling people that. They're telling people it's about the science. They're telling people it's about saving lives, and it's not. It's about politics and about, exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's about politics.
Well,
conclusion on coronavirus.
Okay.
At least if you're a Democrat.
Good talk.
Good segue to something different.
I was going to say, because I know we got...
That was only 10 minutes. That was only 10 minutes. We're good.
I'm saying we've got
transition.
A politics topic. I was trying to be smooth, right?
So I don't think we've ever come up with hand signals for this particular show, but like when I do this, it doesn't mean I want to interrupt you. This means I have a point to make after you're done.
Right. Well, I had like 5 more minutes to talk, so that's why I wanted to be like...
Yeah.
Jimbo was on one on that one.
I know. You're on the warpath, and that's
You're gonna be raising your hand for a long time because I had something to say. Okay.
But topic
Anyway,
number 2 for State of the State.
Let's red wave.
Red
you
wave.
think a red wave is going to come hit Portland's? Probably not Portland.
I was gonna
is it going to
say,
hit Oregon?
That's a quick segment.
Is it going to hit Oregon? In what ways do you think it does? If it does or doesn't?
So I perennially, or whatever, quadrennially, I guess would be the maybe more appropriate term, optimistic that yes, there will be a red wave. I mean, I worked for the guy who was running for governor in 2018. I wouldn't have done that if I thought there was a 0% chance he was going to win. I think that from a national standpoint, 2022 is going to be bad for Democrats. They control all 3 levers of Congress, or all 3 levers of power at the federal level. They've got nothing to show for it. Build Back Better was going to be Joe Biden's signature piece of legislation. That's not even going to get through because Joe Manchin can't get on board. Despite the fact that he basically wrote the bill, the president is at historically low levels of popularity, bordering along the lines of where Trump was, and people hated Trump. Nobody actually knows anything about Joe Biden because they don't talk about him 24 hours a day on CNN like they did with Donald Trump. But everybody just knows he's kind of doing a bad job. And people, politics aside, people walk outside and they see what's going on and they're like, it's time for a change. And I think you're right, probably not in Portland specifically, but in the Tri-County area here, Portland metro area for the state across as a whole, there's just a whole lot of stuff that just is not working and people are sick and tired of it. And I think there's a chance at least that enough of those folks wake up and say, I'm not really Republican, I'm not really a Trump person or whatever, but that person's been doing this for 20 years and that person's saying I want to come in and try it a little differently and I want to try it a little differently, so I'm going to vote for that person.
My thought on that is, you have people like James Ball III over here, a phenomenal person who's running for Metro.
Thanks. Metro, yep.
Yeah. And I think when people hear someone like his message, I think that you can have that kind of conversion that you're talking about, Nick, in which they realize for 20, 30 years, we've been following this person. They have not done a great job. They've only let us down. And here's a rational Republican who is running over here.
Drink.
I'm running as a nonpartisan, though. So
I know. I'm just saying.
I don't have to fly the R flag.
They'll find it out. You have a podcast.
Well, I do have a podcast with the name. Yeah,
but
can't hide from it.
The problem is that still what I've seen in the county Republican Party and the state Republican Party is most of them are still kind of kowtowing to the Trump message of politics. And you are not going to win in this state, by and large, in places that are not already Republican strongholds, with that message and with that attitude, because there are so many people that are adverse to that type of politics, adverse to a lot of its policies. And I see continuously in the ORP and the MCRP that they still grasp those and hold on to those as a way of winning. And you're not going to do that statewide in any meaningful way if you keep on that type of messaging.
That's for the uninitiated, the Oregon Republican Party and the Multnomah County Republican Party. Show up for a meeting if you ever want a real good time. It's a rockin' good time. But I will point you to one Glenn Youngkin. I think that Virginia is a pretty decent comp for Oregon. I think there's one real major city and a couple of other somewhat large, medium-ish urban areas, and there's a lot of rural parts of the state, and there's a DC type of Republican that's somebody like me, and there's a Roanoke type of Republican who's somebody who's shows up to a MAGA rally and brags to his friend about the fact that he's not vaccinated. And I think Oregon has
Oregon is not Virginia, my friend.
As the probably only person in the room who's lived in both states, I feel like it's at least a decent comp. I feel like there's enough of a similarity where we can say we have to balance a very large urban area that's not going super well and a big part of the state that's pretty rural. And there's Portland Republicans like James and me, and there's...
And me, I'm right here.
And Xander.
And Xander. There we go. And rural Republicans who are a lot more, how dare you say anything bad about Donald Trump? And he's the guy that won for us in 2016. And, don't change horses in the middle of the race, despite the fact that he already did lose, which is, we don't need to get into that. But I do feel like if you are a good candidate, and more importantly, if you have a good message, if you can communicate a good message, you can talk about why, as a Republican, you can come in and solve some of the problems that we're facing, and why, as a Democrat, that person can't. And yes, even though our party nominated and elected Donald Trump, and yes, our party stormed the Capitol a year and 4 days ago, and I know all of these
DC
things.
Or Salem, because we did it twice.
Our party stormed the Capitols, both of them. I do believe that there is a candidate that can put that out if you're good at what you're doing. If you're a Democrat, all you just kind of have to do is not screw up. But if you're a bad Democrat, if you're Tina Kotek and you get the nomination for governor, who's this horribly liberal person versus a sane, competent R, I think it's a race.
One of the things that I bring up frequently, I'm sure I've brought it up in this podcast before, is that there are a good portion of Democrats Portland Democrats, who do not trust Republicans. That they see with Xander and I, we need to stop talking before the podcast because we end up talking about all the good things. Anyway, the legitimate rape comments, the now Texas abortion law, the Mississippi abortion law, grab them by the pussy. These are the things that...
There goes our not explicit.
I'll check the box on this one.
It's an exact quote, though.
It's an exact quote from the President of the United States.
He wasn't the president at the time.
Well,
and B,
sure.
It's still an expletive, which
okay. I will check the box
to.
on this one to say that it's explicit. Right. I apologize, viewers, if you have young children listening.
If you're offended by something that the president actually ended up saying.
Anyway, they see those sort of things and they say, as bad as Kotek and Brown and Wheeler are running the state into the ground, as bad as they're doing, at least they're not taking away our right to choose. At least they're not making these crazy statements. And you know what? If maybe the Republicans could do better, maybe they can't. But I know for a fact that they are going to take away the woman's right to choose if they are elected. And that's what a lot of Democrats in Portland feel. And they will never vote for a Republican as long as that is the case.
You just said the magic words right there. You are exactly right. That's how a lot of Democrats feel. You don't need a lot of Democrats to change your mind. You need a few few Democrats to change their mind. There's
You're correct.
very blue districts. You're never going to get, if you run against Earl Blumenauer, you're never going to beat him in a race for Congress. There's very blue districts. If you find a marginal race, if you find a 55-45 seat or something, if you have a few Democrats change their mind, and that, like, you're not talking to. This is what got Mitt Romney into trouble. He said 47% of people have their minds made up on one side or the other. And as much trouble he's got into, he's exactly right for that. But that's all you need. If there's 3% of Democrats whose minds you can change, that can be the ball game in certain races.
I'm just going to say Oregon Right to Life is ruining this party. Fight me.
I just choose not to do that for several reasons,
but
not the least of which because you're right. We need to stop talking about abortion.
We need to stop talking about abortion in Oregon. It is a losing battle. Like the conservative stance on abortion is not like the last time we had a ballot initiative with anything regarding abortion was basically the Hyde Amendment that we would not use state funds to pay for abortion. There's no further restrictions, just that we wouldn't use state funds, and it lost like 2-1. There is nobody in Oregon wants to restrict abortion at all, and if that is the number one thing that we're working on, then we're going to keep losing.
Oregon has the most liberal abortion laws in the United States, and there's
basically
no way
unrestricted. Yeah,
and there's no way that's going to change because the vast majority of people want it that way. And if that's the hill that you want to go and put everything upon, then it's just going to continue to lose. And that's what turns a vast majority of people off from this party, is that issue continuously. It's settled in the state.
We need to just
settled in the state.
On.
Like, go on to something else.
I am sorry if that is the number one, like if you're one issue voter and listening to this and that's like abortion is your issue, but in the state of Oregon is not going to change. We need to focus on areas where we can make a difference. Abortion is not one of them.
It's anecdotal, and I know that I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but one of my wife's friends was a pro-choice Democrat, and in 2018 was like, iffy on Newt versus Kate, and she was just like, I feel like I would consider voting for Newt, but I just can't do it because he's going to take away a woman's right to choose. And he's had all these ads about how pro-choice he is, and he over-the-counter birth control and all this stuff. But Kate Brown came up and was just saying, Newt doesn't know what he thinks about abortion, and that's enough for a lot of people. And it's just like, it's an uphill Sisyphusian battle, and that's what you you're not running as a Republican, but that's what any Republican candidate has to deal with, and it's hard.
Being a little self-serving here, that's one of the reasons that I like this metro race is because Washington County, this district is basically that 55-45 that you're talking about, and with the Glenn Youngkin effect, that basically pushes that to 50-50, and I think that especially that it's a very suburban district that I'm running in, I don't have to talk about abortion because Metro has no say over abortion. It has no say over gay rights. Like those issues, I probably have to talk about them at some point, but there's no jurisdiction over those sorts of things from Metro. And when you're looking at a 55-45 district, like you said, you only need to convince a few people. And I think with the national effects and the fact that things like schools and public safety are on the ballot and Trump is not, I think that the suburbs are going to take a little step to the right from where they were 2 years ago.
From your mouth to God's ears, as our friend and podcast friend Jeff Goodman would say.
This is this metro race is winnable. So,
ladies
and gentlemen, if you're listening and you'd like to go to jamesaball.com,
and donate $50 tax credit.
Donate. This is actually where the podcast is being hosted now. So
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so
2 in 1.
You go. Okay.
All right. Topic number 3. What we got?
Okay. Let's see. Let's do public safety, or
the lack thereof.
Or lack thereof. Portland has seen more shootings and more homicides.
I have a great story about this, actually.
Go ahead.
So as I'm telling my story, can I bug you for a quick favor? So my story about this is, and I'll steal one of the glasses too.
I got it. You might as well get one for me too if you're up.
Since it's there, this is good. This is going to make for
if
great
you're listening
audio.
on the podcast and not YouTube, you have no idea what's going on right now, and I apologize.
Xander and I have finished our beers, and we're now pouring ourselves a glass of whiskey. James was smart, and he had his whiskey poured poured before we started, but Xander and I are just not that. Actually, it's mostly just me. I'm just not that good of a host, so I'll blame myself for that one.
I mean, you brought out a liter of.
A
A
liter.
liter. Do we sell
Knob Creek.
liter of cola?
No, this is a liter of.
It's
Knob
1.5,
Creek
but
rye.
who's counting?
Oh,
But-
it's a 1.5 liter.
1.5 liters of Knob Creek
So this is gonna be a good
rye
podcast.
whiskey.
Anyway, my story about public safety is
Buckle up, kids.
thus. I work out of a bank branch, and we walked in today, and there was a window that had been shattered open, and there were protective bars outside of it that had been yanked off. The hole was small enough; it was the size of, as my friend put it, a large cantaloupe. It was not something that a person could have crawled through. We didn't get, to my knowledge at least, we didn't get robbed or anything like that. Somebody was just mad and hucked a rock at us or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we called our internal people that you call when something like this happens, and they said one of the things you need to do is file a police report. Okay, no problem. My buddy waited on the phone for over an hour getting through to the Portland Police Department, and the recording kept saying, "Don't dial 911. 911 is for life and death emergencies or property that's being stolen at this very moment. Do not dial 911." And it took an hour, and it's like, God forbid, what if you were in that situation where there's imminent threat to your body or your property, and you need somebody in the next 90 seconds, 5 minutes, however, whatever response time is. And I don't at all fault Portland police for this.
Some people do. So
That-
we can talk about that in a minute. But
they're doing the best they can with what they got. They're choosing what and what not to respond to, and it's just it's a whole thing in and of itself. And we'll get to a point where we talk about the ever increasing amount of homeless camps. There's been, by an order of 1.5 times magnitude, there's been more homicides in the year 2021 than any other year in Portland history. This, despite all kinds of
predominantly
efforts to.
black. Like
Well, and-
the victims are people of color.
And this is the thing.
Predominantly.
That's exactly right. And Portland is failing those whom it most purports to serve. Everybody in the county, everybody in the city trips over themselves talking about equity, and we need to make things better for East County and for all these underserved areas, and that we pass bond measures and increase taxes and over and over and over again, and this is the result that we have to show for it. And it's either just this endemic thing that nothing can be done about, or Portland leaders are incompetent. And either way, it's a poison pill to swallow. But my personal opinion is that Portland leaders are incompetent.
Xander's stretching.
Xander's got notes. I have whiskey. Xander has notes.
I have both, actually.
Which of the three of us was prepared for this?
So, I mean, James, if you want to go talk on this first, I'm going to go on a rant. So
Go for it. Please
Okay.
do.
This is why we have a podcast.
This is why we're here.
So, Portland Police Bureau is down over 150 cops right now, according to the chief of police. That's part of it. There were a lot of early retirements and just resignations after the protests of the summer of 2020.
Well, I mean, can you blame them? I mean, the city spent a year chanting "all cops are bastards." We're already at the point. Where
I wasn't going to say it. I wasn't going to say it.
that is the chant, though. So let's
Yeah.
Again, we're quoting verbatim. It's not like we're cursing on this podcast. We're quoting verbatim. And I mean, again, I think as the person that was down there in the streets most in 2020 in the summer, I can speak to.
Xander was on Rolling Stone, right?
I was in Rolling Stone.
Got to shout out your
I was in a
media
couple
appearances.
papers. I was in a couple papers.
Couple
Rolling Stone.
papers,
I was
that makes
quoted in addition to.
Where was the photo taken? Was it local or was it K2 or
I had one
photo you with American flag?
that was Washington Post, actually.
Washington Post,
and also
yeah.
LA Times.
There you go.
And
National
Portland
media.
Street Roots. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on. Go ahead with your
Solid
rant.
get.
We're just I'm establishing your credibility as
I hope that I was
someone
bragging
that
on
you
our
were-
buddy.
And I'll also go in and preface this as the reason that I got a lot of media attention for my personal presence down there at the protests in the summer of 2020 was being an American flag bearing Republican, Mexican American, also standing up with BLM. That's basically what the whole thing was. And I was an oddity out there for flying the flag and also being a open member of the Republican Party. So let's put that out there first. That's why I got a lot of attention. Anyways, got tear gas about 20, 30 times for doing nothing but waving an American flag
Tear
in the
gas
streets.
sucks.
Tear gas sucks.
Yeah, not fun.
And my issue, okay, so with Portland police in particular, I think they're kind of a disingenuous actor as far as their ability to get along with certain communities. The vast majority of them don't live in Portland, so they don't think they have a lot of skin in the game, personally. They have gotten in so many scandals lately that just prove that they're kind of disingenuous actors as far as being
Joanne
part of the
Hardesty
committee.
thing.
Yeah, I was going to say the Hardesty thing.
The Hardesty thing, which was basically what was almost described as a internal coup against her to try to get her just out of office.
She was accused of a hit and run. They leaked it to the press, and then they
Not just
sat on it.
The president of the Portland Police Association, their
Right.
union leaked it. 2 other officers leaked it.
And then they waited until 2:00 in the morning to go knock on her door,
Bang
with
on
the
her door
intent
3 hours later.
of a perp walk out. So not a good look for PPD.
Not a good look. Much as I
No.
don't like Joanne Hardesty, not a good look.
I don't think anyone on the podcast cares much for Joanne Hardesty, but to be the first black woman on the city council and to have the police just continuously harass her, leak documents to try to defame her. Again, this is why people have issues with Portland police.
Right.
And that's not accounting to Captain Mark Kruger, if we know about this guy.
Nope.
Oh, boy. In the early 2000s, Mark Kruger, a Portland police officer, was found to have put up memorial signs to Nazis in a Portland public park, 2 of whom were tried at Nuremberg. They put up these memorials with a couple of his other cop friends while wearing SS uniforms. Again, not great, right?
No, I will not great. Yeah. I would agree.
He was disciplined, and then the Portland Union, the police union, went to go and bat for him. So they had to apologize to him. They had to go and give back all of his back pay that he was stripped of. And he ended up retiring as the highest paid city employee last year, or not last year anymore, in like May or June of 2020, with over $265,000 a year in his annual salary. And when he was disciplined, the chief of police had to then go and apologize to him for disciplining him for being pro-Nazi.
So I think it's interesting that in 2022, 2021, the liberal, Portland's general philosophy is, the Portland, the police union is at fault here. That they are a huge problem and they're looking out for people. And I don't disagree with that. I wonder how long it takes before they take that same criticism and look at other public employee unions and see that, it's maybe not quite to the extent as the PPD, but they're still looking like the fact that you can't discipline a police officer is because of the union. You can't do that to a teacher. You can't do that to a public employee for the same reason, because the union has their back. And I wonder at what point do we start looking at all public employee unions in that same critical light?
I would argue that the Portland Police Association should be judged in a different light because, A, they are the model that every other police union in this country uses, because the Portland Police Association was the very first one to actually establish a prominent police union and be successful with it.
Did not know that.
Yeah, so they started it. And also, again, usually with a teacher or, I don't know, a union contracted plumber for the city, they're not in the ability to kill people and get away with it.
Fair.
So there is a
Fair
much
point.
higher bar of responsibility for the Portland Police Association and the Portland Police Bureau than it is for other unions involved in city government. So I understand your point, James. I think that we should all have a critical look at this, but also know that essentially the Portland Police Bureau has the ability to kind of kill on sight and mostly get away with it, even when they're at fault, even to the point in which you have the highest paid city employee sympathizing with Nazis and then getting a pat on the back and a sorry we disciplined you kind of note on top of it.
Tend to
Fair
agree
point.
with Xander on that one. I
like
to
I'm
dunk
not,
on
I'm not disagreeing.
OEA and
I'm
stuff, but
I'm not
my
disagreeing.
wife
I'm
can't
just saying.
shoot anybody.
Well, no, you're right.
Not with
The
that
consequences are less drastic.
That
But the
they are.
same thing happens where you cannot fire anybody.
But I agree. I very much agree
Like-
with the sentiment, and it's endemic in a lot of different things. And there's a number of Portland service workers that are, as of today, they've declared that they're going to look at going on strike on the 20th. And now we look at sewage things and water services and whatever. And it's just like, this is stuff that has to work. Like, you guys have to be able to figure this stuff out. And if you have bad apples in you, and I know we've had the bad apple conversation on the podcast.
bad
before,
apples in the police
but-
are much worse than bad apples in the
And-
teachers union.
and they are.
fully on board here. I'm not
they are.
saying
But
that-
I agree with you that we need to be able to kind of weed out the problems in our own camp. I mean, you and I, we have a whole podcast where we talk about bad Republicans. I literally every time we find someone just like, oh my God, what did Donald Trump say today or whatever. Well, and we do that every day. There needs to be that same kind of self-reflective behavior across many organizations that we just don't have at the moment.
yeah.
And one of the most interesting things, too, especially coming from Portland, which is a majority white city with a very small minority population, one of the
Very
smallest,
small.
if any, metropolitan city
Yeah.
in the nation, is that continuously across the board, though, the communities that want better policing and better police are ethnic minority
Yeah.
communities.
Yes.
And so it's typically the far, and also even far radical left that want to slash police funding, purporting to go and support minority communities, when minority communities tend to want better, more accountable policing, but more policing in their neighborhoods to make their neighborhoods safer. So there's a huge disconnect between the far left activists and the pretty center
I am really
minority communities that tend to just want, more accountable but better policing in their neighborhoods. They don't want less
really
cops for the most
sick.
part.
I'm really sick of white people trying to stand up for minorities and doing the exact opposite of what those minority communities actually
fawn
want.
to me, James. I love this. As the token minority on this podcast,
Yeah, right,
I'm
yeah.
Well,
digging
there you
all
go.
of this. Thanks,
How-
buddy.
Okay, well, how do you feel about the term Latinx?
Hate it.
Yeah, there you go.
Do you know why I hate it?
Why do you hate it?
Because one, we've already used the word, it's a bastardization of the Hispanic language in
Yep.
general, of all of them. It makes no sense. On top of that, too, it's a continuation of cultural imperialism upon the language of
Yeah.
the Hispanic nations. And again, for the record, I'm Mexican American, just so the listeners know that in case they don't.
People that are not
know from before.
watching on YouTube.
Yeah. And on top of that, too, it's something like 3% of Spanish speakers in the Americas use the term. The vast majority don't like it, and those who've never heard it, and the other vast majority have not ever heard of it. It's ridiculous.
3% of the Latino community use it, and 40%, 40, find it at least somewhat offensive.
Yeah.
Nice. Good use of stats
So
on that. That's pretty good.
good use of
So
analysis there.
You know who uses the term Latinx? Woke white people.
Yep.
Yep. There you go.
And I will say though, there's this very, very, very small minority of Hispanic folks that are usually of the trans varietal that do prefer the term because they don't like gender
You know what?
terms.
If you want
And
to use
that's
that term for
And
yourself,
that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Call yourself whatever you want.
But to impose it upon the culture at large
exactly.
is where I have an issue with. Anyways, I do want to make a point that there are a small trans community of the Latin varietal that do like to use that term for themselves, and I think that's wonderful, and they should be, and that's good. But
As a non-member of that community, we should default to what the community calls themselves.
I agree. As part
the
of that
majority of that community.
Here.
That's my stance on the issue. So I don't use
Speaking
that
of
term.
majority of the community, I think we got topic number 5 coming up.
Yeah.
I wasn't done with police reform.
Well, Xander, what do you have the most notes on since you're the most prepared here? What do you want to talk about?
I just want to talk very briefly about cahoots in Eugene.
Please do. Go ahead.
Are we familiar with cahoots?
Not at all.
Explain. I am, but yeah, go ahead. Explain to the viewers and
Cahoots
listener.
is a 30-year in the making project out of Eugene, Oregon. They came up with a different model to handling 911 calls. Cahoots stands for Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets. I think I got that right.
Something
Very cool.
The idea basically is that the vast majority of 911 calls in any given city, Eugene was the model for this, can be handled by people other than police.
Probably oftentimes should be handled.
Yeah, and so just to read you some basic stats from the last year, they had a budget that I could read was, I think, 2019. $2 million budget. What they do is they send out an EMT and a mental health counselor to the vast majority of 911 calls because most of them don't need a cop. With their $2 million budget, they saved an annual of $8.5 million a year in public safety and an additional $14 million in ambulance and emergency room costs with a $2 million budget. So again, as rational Republicans,
Heyo.
I don't know why we don't go and look at more systems such as this that can save huge costs. And also, the majority of police shootings that happen in this country, up to 50% of them happen with people with mental health crises. And so if you can send an EMT and a mental health counselor instead, you prevent the ability to have those kind of dangerous situations pop up to police that are not necessarily trained to be able to deal with these conflicts. And one last point before I let you go, James.
Sure.
Again, from the 2019, Eugene had the Cahoots program had 24,000 police calls in a year. Do you want to take a guess on how many times cops were needed out of 24,000 calls?
Very few.
697.
Okay.
It's like 1%. I forget. I've seen that statistic, but
Yeah, 150 times.
yeah.
Out of 24,000 calls, only 150 times did these people feel the need to have police backup. And so if you're preventing that many times that cops have to interact, again, cops are being asked to do too much in this country currently. And I want to say that initially, right off the bat, they're asked to do too much. When you have a Cahoot-style model out of Eugene, I think it alleviates cops to do things that they should be doing more of and not having to deal with things they're not equipped to do.
So a couple weeks ago, we talked with Representative Ron Noble, who is now congressional candidate Ron Noble, and he's a former police chief. And one of the things that we talked about a little bit was this issue, and he basically agreed that police have been asked to do way more than what they are trained to do, what they should be doing, and he was all about it. He was all about taking that scope and applying it to, giving it to a mental health centric organization. And the city of Portland is actually working on something like that. I
They have
think
a pilot program right now.
Yeah, I think it's a pilot still. I think it's started in full force, which I'm not really sure why. I guess the speed of government is just very, very slow. I feel like you have the model already. All you have to do is get some vans with a mental health counselor and an EMT, and
You just
send
have
them
to have
to
the will.
911 calls. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive in that I think that this is not something that would take a lot of coordinating. You just have to do it.
Eugene has been doing this for 30 years.
I know,
They have
right?
the
Like
outline.
you have the model already. You just have to check the box and just implement it. I don't know why it's taken 12 years or however long it's taken for the Portland. Anyway,
We'll get Ted Wheeler is police commissioner.
he is. Yeah, he's
There
in
we
charge
go. We'll
of
get Ted Wheeler on someday.
There you go. All
There you
right,
go.
Wheeler.
Ted Wheeler, Mayor Wheeler.
If you're listening,
Come on the
and you'd
pod.
like to come on the podcast.
I actually
Ted
do want to
Wheeler.
get him on the pod.
I would love to.
That would be a great,
I don't know
yeah.
that Mayor Wheeler is interested in coming on our podcast, but
we'll work on that.
we might
We're good folks to talk to. We have good whiskey.
All right, guys, we are fairly close to the end. Is there anything else you would like to speak about before we end the podcast? Anything, Xander? You've got 9 pages of notes. What do
you got?
What else on there
3
is
minutes,
that we
'cause
haven't?
we do have
haven't-
to wrap up.
Man, I can say this for another episode. We can just cut it here, then we can just start record another episode after this, and it can be this part of the next
Zoom
episode.
right on in.
I got so much stuff on homelessness. I got so much stuff on
Homelessness,
schools
yeah.
and COVID.
We should have a whole episode on homelessness.
Okay.
I think that's.
I'll save that for later. That's
yeah, we
fine.
got the content. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because that kind of goes into my whole rant about
Complain about
Stan Pilliam's
homelessness.
stupid idea for homelessness.
Apologies to Stan, friend of the pod.
No apologies to Stan. That's a bad idea, dude. Your idea is bad, and I hate it.
Tell us what you really think.
It's a bad idea, and I hate it.
On that note,
I was going to say to wrap up the pod for me, I do think that there, everybody, and this is January 10th that we're recording this. I don't know off the top of my head the date that the State of the Union is scheduled for, but it's always around this time of year that politics watchers always get all excited because Joe Biden's going to get up on a Tuesday night or whatever, and people make drinking games for it or whatever.
Yeah,
but
buddy.
invariably, at some point in that speech, there will be the phrase, the state of our union is strong. They will always, always, always do that. And I feel like one could demonstrably argue that the state of Oregon is not strong. The state of Oregon is floundering, is mediocre if we're, I think, being glass half full. I think there's a lot of problems. I think there's a lot of issues that are not being addressed, that are not just politics things, not just Salem things, not just insider baseball things. They affect men and women and children, students, teachers,
And it's
workers,
poor leadership.
firefighters.
it's poor leadership.
And I think that
causing a lot of these problems.
there is no viable solution in sight, nor are there viable leaders in sight. And this is, if we were going to give a grade, the state of our state is floundering. But I believe that there is optimism. Whether you are an R or a D, I do believe that
Or an
voters or an I, unless you're the
Or an
Independent
A.
Party of Oregon, they're a whole nother. They're just D lights. But if you're like a real independent, not an IPO independent. But if you are a person who is in any way active in your community, a person who goes outside of it, you are seeing some of these problems come to rear their ugly heads, and you're waking up to the fact that we can do better. We can ask more of the people whom we elect as our leaders, and we can hold them accountable when they don't reach those goals. And R primary, D primary, independent primary, whatever level that you're looking to vote for people at, I do think and hope that this will be a year that there comes a sea change in a lot of different roles in leadership.
And the one thing I will say to that is I do critique a lot of people that are running in the ORP for various offices, because I do think that they've been too beholden to our last president to be relevant to our state at large. However, saying that, though, I think that I would also behoove people to go and look at the fact that this has been a one-party state and a one-party city for the last 30-plus years. And ask yourselves, have things gotten better or not? And I would hope that we would have more rational Republicans move in there and go and acknowledge the fact that when Republicans used to rule this state with the Mark Hatfields of the world, the Tom McCalls, the Vicatias, they were all pretty middle-of-the-road Republicans.
We revere those folks, yeah.
That were very rational about things, and they recognized the balance between the economy and the environment. They recognized between social justice rights and police accountability. They had all these, like, we made the bottle bill, for goodness sake, like we pioneered a lot of the most pro-environment things out there, and we did that as Republicans. And no one thinks of us that way anymore, because I don't think anyone's really going that direction. So I would argue if we went back towards the model that we had in like the late 70s to early 80s as Republicans in this state, and fought as traditional Oregon Republicans for the things that we used to fight for, that we would give people a better choice as to what to vote for, as opposed to the Democrats that I honestly believe have driven this state into the ground for the last 30 years.
One of our friends collected a mic drop from Xander. One of our friends collected some statements that were made in the Portland mayor's race, not this last time, but 6 years ago.
Jules
now?
Bailey and Ted Wheeler.
Jules Bailey versus Ted Wheeler, and the comments from both of them were very critical of the direction that the city of Portland was going, that things were not going well, and that, of course, they were the ones to fix it, completely ignoring the fact that Democrats have run the city of Portland for 40 plus years. and they were both, Jules Bailey, Democrat, Ted Wheeler, Democrat, and talking about how the Democratic Party has failed the city of Portland, and they were the one to fix it. And
one of those people won, and he did not fix it.
That's true.
Spoiler alert.
Because he's continuing the same system. I mean, that's the point I'm making. Like,
well, that's true. So but before we go,
keep doing the same thing for 40 years, and 42 is not going to make a difference unless you change things.
We always ask ourselves who our favorite Republican is as we wrap up a show, and I at one point or another I think all of us have answered that question on this podcast. So I think is a good question. What is your New Year's resolution for Oregon politics going into 2022? Since it's my question, I'll jump in and start. I'll give you guys a second to think about what you're going to say. Mine is to become more involved in race for a city council seat. That's a little bit cheating because I think you already know who are.
Yes.
There's one person in particular that I really like who's running for city council, but I think it's important to not just as much as I like.
He's running against John Hardesty.
He's running. Yeah, all right. Spoiler. But. I think we get really focused on governor's race and Christine versus Stan versus Bud versus Jessica versus Dallas if you decide, whoever. And then on the Democrats, Tobias and Tina, and is Nick Kristof going to be able to actually run or whatever. And there's a lot of down ballot races, and this would be my ask for any listeners and or viewers. Is find something that gets a little bit less attention. Find something that there's not as many folks paying attention to, because that, go volunteer for Stan, go volunteer for Christine, go volunteer whatever for governor. But that's where you can, 26 votes in a state house seat or on a school board seat or whatever. That can make a difference. You can text 26 people and ask them to vote for your person and swing an election. Those are where real differences can be made. You don't have to spend millions of dollars or hours and hours and hours block walking.
Well, my New Year's resolution is to win this race for Metro.
There you go. I kind of figured yours was also going to be pretty easy.
Yeah, that's a pretty easy one. And I'm going to win it, man. Like this is legit. This is going to happen. So,
Xander, what do you got?
Can I be your press spokesman? And can I go up there with a quart of bourbon in my hand every time I speak to the press?
With this, it has to be this amount every time.
Oh, a liter and a half.
Liter and a half.
I mean, if I have to, I will sacrifice my liver for. I mean, James is already drinking out of a nice mustachioed glass, which very much,
My wife got me that, actually. That was very funny.
Why did she get that from me?
I probably because she didn't marry you, but I'll ask.
Rude. My New Year's resolution for politics this year is to go and put myself back into the MCRP and ORP as much as I used to do about 7 or 8 years ago. They kind of hate me, and that's fine.
I embraced the hatred. It makes me feel good. Makes me warm and fuzzy inside.
Is well liked, but
yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, and I used to get invited with some other of my more ethnic minority Republican friends to these events because they were like, "Oh, look, they're not white, they're brown, they're young, that's great." And then we would step up to their forums that they would invite us to, and we would not make them very happy afterwards, and they would yell at us a little bit. But we had good things to say, and I'm very proud of what we used to say to them, and we challenged a lot of their beliefs, and I thought it was for the progression of the party in the, again, in the likes of the Vicatillas and the Mark Hatfields of the Oregon Republican politics of yore. And it didn't take too well, and it was funny to see them fight against that because that was the time in which we dominated the state.
I've got a whole section on my website about fighting extremism and basically my jousting with the Proud Boys, and that is one of the things that I am the most proud of. Is those guys hate me, and I love it.
Yeah,
I love that they hate me, and so I think there's so much value in providing an alternative narrative to what the majority, even if it's a very small group of people, the majority thinks within the Republican Party, and so I welcome you coming back to the party and providing your alternative view to the establishment.
Yeah, I mean, considering the fact that I almost got the crap kicked out of me on August 22nd by a bunch of the Proud Boys who were within about 2 feet of me with baseball bats and bear mace and
Screw those guys.
clubs, and they wanted to kick the crap out of me. That was like, I don't think that was a badge of honor.
Yeah.
That's okay.
No, it's fun.
There it is.
All right. Well,
You
with
cowards.
that, I think
You freaking cowards. Sorry.
I think that's a good spot to end it. Xander, again, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me back and feeding me whiskey.
Absolutely. And
Anytime.
listeners and viewer, we will talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the Rational Republican podcast. Your hosts are James Ball and Nick Perlosky. The show today is brought to you by ProLift Garage Doors of Portland, serving the greater Portland metro area for all your garage door installation and repair needs. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can email us at james@jamesaball.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can find our episodes at jamesaball.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts.